Thanks. Evening. I'm not a member of the IPP, I'm a member of the IMB, which is the Independent Monitoring Board at Wandsworth Prison. I've been doing this for 8 years, and there's always something different. There's always something you don't know. There's always something you're learning every day. The criminal justice system just changes the whole time. But as Brian said, the IPP, indeterminate sentence for public protection, is a really hot potato, and I think most people don't know enough about it. As we speak now, there are 2,456 people in prison who have already served their sentence. As Brian said, they've served their term, what they call tariff. Used to be called tariff, it's now called minimum term, which is the amount of punishment the judge has given them, and after which they would be released on license if they had a normal determinate sentence. As your good old-fashioned burglar quite often does, gets a sentence, gets a tariff of 2 years, after 2 years, he's out, on license. He can be brought back again if he's naughty, he burgles again, but at least he knows when he's going out. Now, indeterminate sentences, as Brian said, you don't know when you're getting out. Now, where did they come from? Well, they come from that bull in the Yorkshire china shop called Blunkett. David Blunkett, in 2003, decided that as a Home Secretary, he didn't fancy judges being allowed to tell people how long they could stay in prison, so he tried to purloin for himself, as the Home Secretary, the right to do this, to say how long sentences should be for various crimes. But unfortunately, the Court of Appeal told him to really mind his own business, that he might make the law, but judges enforced it. So, no stopping Blunkett, he changed the law. And what he did was decide that you would have certain sentences for certain crimes. For example, he said, anybody who commits a violent murder will do life, and it means life. Anybody who commits a rather unpleasant sexual crime resulting in death, that's rape with aggravation, will get 30 years, and they'll do 30 years. And so on down the line, until he came to a series of people who were considered to be possibly dangerous, but possibly more consistent nuisances. And he coined the indeterminate sentence for them. You'll go to prison for an amount of time that the judge will decide, but you won't get out until you can prove that you won't do it again, or be a pain to society again. Well, interesting. What were the first people who were given these IPPs? I'll tell you, he passed the law in 2003, and it came into effect in April 2005. After April 2005, before the end of the year, there were 707 IPPs in prisons up and down the country. 28 had committed crimes against children, 40 were rapists, 44 were arsonists, 149 had done wounding of various sorts, 284 were good old-fashioned muggers. You know, bang, give us your wallet. The judges had decided they would stay in prison until they could convince the parole board, because that's who does the deciding, until they could convince the parole board that they wouldn't misbehave again. Now, that didn't really give the full categorization of the number of people or the sort of criminals who could be given IPPs. because it was rapidly systematized by Blunkett and his team, and 153 offences carry the possibility of an IPP. Now the mind boggles, doesn't it? Nobody's ever told me what the whole range is. But I do believe that permanent shoplifting can be one of them. Exposing yourself in public can be another. Now we've got 111 at Wandsworth, 111 chaps doing IPP. I don't know them personally, I come across them when we see people. Oh, incidentally, the Independent Monitoring Board is a board which monitors conditions for prisoners. We try to ensure fair and decent treatment for prisoners. And when we see them and when we talk to them and look at their problems, we don't ask what they've done. I rarely know what anyone's done. So I don't know who the IPP guys are, although I had a case last week where one of them wrote to us and we had to do some research for him. Anyway, there are 153 different offences, which if you repeat that offence you get an IPP. Sorry, I should have made that clear. You don't get an IPP for the first time you offend in this long list, going obviously from rape down to exposing yourself in the park. If you do either of these twice, you get an IPP. Oh, some rapes, of course, get straight away, life. But there are various forms of assault, of sexual assault, other sorts of assault, and diminishing, I suppose, right down to all sorts of personal attack, punching in the face, knifing. I really have never seen the whole list, and I doubt anyone has, of the 153 offences that can attract an IPP. But right now, I told you there were 2,456 prisoners who are in prison, having served their tariff, but they haven't got out. I'll come to that in a minute. And that's out of 5,837 who are in prison. So 5,837 are doing IPP sentences. Already, nearly half of them should have been out, but haven't been able to persuade people that they won't offend again. Now, what's all that about? Why? Huh? Why do we have 6% of the country's prisoners? There's about 86,000 people in prison, mostly men, of course. And why are they in prison and they can't talk their way out of the IPP? These 5,837 who were in prison under an IPP 3 days ago. I got the very up-to-date figure. You can quote me on that. Well, the ideal way to persuade the parole board that you won't do it again and that you're safe to be released is that you do some courses. There are courses run in prisons. The psychology departments in most prisons run these courses. There's a course called Sex Offenders Treatment Program, SOTP. That speaks for itself, doesn't it? There's anger management. There's ETS, Enhanced Thinking Skills. You know, it's soon to be renamed Thinking Skills. I'm not quite sure why. But these are courses run seriously by psychologists, and they are reasoning courses. The men who are in prison are asked to reason certain cases, certain situations, and when they're doing these courses, they are, of course, observed by their tutors, and reports are written. Now, this is ideally how prisoners can get their way to the parole board and convince the parole board that they won't do it again. Now, trouble is, there aren't enough courses. Brian knows well. Brian runs a superb blog on this, and even though I'm involved in IPPs in prison, it's Brian's blog which has attracted pitiful pleas, eh, Brian?
Absolutely.
The people who write to Brian and his blog have pitiful stories. of guys in prison. They've done all the courses they can, or they can't get on a course